Ultima imperitrix, the animal genetically engineered and made for stardom. Powerful enough to bring down theropods and sauropods alike. Made for the arena and spectacle of millions. Will this animal cut it in the wild? Today on Goji Center, we are bringing to light our first genetically modified hybrid dinosaur and spotlighting her biology, traits, and abilities to see if this new hybrid has what it takes to grow up and survive in Isla Sorna. Or might the would-be empress find her reign derailed the moment she hatched from an egg? It's time to find out. In a previous episode, we established that a dinosaur like the Ultima would be hypothetically brought to life during the beginning of the Jurassic Park era. At this point in time, the creation of any hybrid wouldn't have had the same kind of attunement and fine detail splicing the Indominus Rex had. The genetic components of Ultima imperitrix would have been a total of 6. Few, but enough to create a juggernaut whose whole reason for existing was as a park attraction, not an animal that is meant to thrive in the wild. In today's scenario, we'll unleash a new hatchling into the wild. Shortly after the amalgam testing that took place after the events of the Lost World. The testing responsible for the creation of new creatures such as the Spinosaurus, Ankylosaurus, and the quilled raptors. Today, something intended to live in captivity hatched shortly after the laboratory was evacuated. Something that was probably never meant to survive out here in the wild. But will life find a way? Hybrid name Ultima imperitrix, name meaning ultimate saurian empress. At an infant stage, she would be 1.3 feet in height in quadrupedal stance, 2.2 feet at facultative bipedal stance. Length 4 feet, mass over 22 pounds, diet omnivore, chiefly herbivore. Genetic components: Tyrannosaurus rex providing the endocranium, mandible, and neck. Triceratops prorsus providing cranium, upper back, shoulders, extra jaw musculature, and beak. Borealdopelta provides dorsal armor, osteoderms, lateral spines. Stegosaurus, osteoderm, subdermal armor on neck, thagomizer, pelvis. Ingentia prima, limbs, mobility, core, body. And Alamosaurus, air sacs, size, extra osteoderms, hind limbs, and pelvis. Before we move on, we'd like to invite you guys to play a fun little game while you watch the rest of this episode. Throughout this mini-documentary, there will be 10 hidden redemption codes that will randomly appear. First 10 people to click the link below and enter the code will get a free audiobook copy of Prehistoria. In the spirit of walking with dinosaurs and presented by Goji Center's lead in-house researcher, this is a trek back 70 million years ago to showcase the life of a raptor like never seen before, after the life of one is upended by an encounter with a trio of dangerous predators. One part story, one part science, this is one for any dinosaur fan. Nothing gigantic starts like this. Most herbivorous dinosaurs start small upon hatching. Had the imperatrix started out this small in the most dangerous environment on the planet, its fate might have been sealed before it even hatched. This is where T-Rex in the mix might cinch for it. Little known fact about dinosaur eggs is that theropods have some of the largest in the fossil record. Not only the biggest egg belongs to a theropod, but tyrannosaur eggs are nearly double the size of herbivorous dinosaurs, similar in size to T-Rex as adults. This would give the hybrid a more developed form and larger body size upon hatching.
Known for pursuing your passions. No one wants to be known for cancer.
The ground and running at almost 2 feet long and 5 pounds, the Ultima would be big enough to defend itself from smaller threats in the undergrowth, like mammalian predators and compies. Still, there are bigger threats in the forest, with millions of years worth of instinct teaching them how to kill young dinosaurs before they become adults. All on her own, the would-be empress might be vulnerable to dilos, compipacks, and raptors. In an island crawling with vicious predators, this animal would find shelter close to one of the most dangerous herbivores to ever exist. How? If the Ultima manages to hear and locate a herd of nearby Triceratops, the Ultima could employ what is called Wasmanian mimicry. Mimicry is the act of imitating other animals or something else. Biological mimicry takes many forms, such as a fly pretending to be a wasp, or cheetah cubs resembling cantankerous honey badgers. Wasmanian mimicry is the kind where one pretends to be another to live amongst them. In this case, the hybrid's budding horns and frill, useful for species identification, makes it look a lot like a young trike. And with Triceratops making up a decent amount of the hybrid's DNA, she could instinctively seek them out. Ceratopsian infants largely got their own food and moved about on their own, but were always protected by the adults. Baby Ultima will be just fine. If successful, Ultima now has a chance to grow up to be the most fierce combatant this island has ever seen. Growing up with the most aggressive and battle-adept herbivores will help in many ways. Locking horns and having sparring partners with other Triceratops will give Ultima plenty of experience on literally using her head. Because she will end up growing much larger than her ceratopsian counterparts, in her adolescent years she might outgrow these strikes, taking part in both intraspecific combat and against other big carnivores. This kind of behavior, or a young dinosaur being raised by another species, is nothing new, seen in nature today and known as brood parasites. Despite the name, this isn't always a bad thing. For instance, spotted cuckoo birds infamously lay their eggs in the nests of crows to be raised alongside the crow hatchlings. Only in this case, the toxic and foul-smelling defenses of the baby cuckoo end up protecting the crows that raise it. The hybrid in this case may be able to earn her keep. Sauropods like Ingentia and Alamosaurus that make up a majority of her genetic composition have surprisingly good color and night vision, more so than most other herbivorous dinosaurs. Bolstered by T-Rex genes, the Ultima could act as a lookout and alert the herd of oncoming threats, which helps her out in the long run. And should a trike or an attacker die from battle, the Ultima would have plenty of food managing that carcass. For those that may think this behavior is a bit bizarre and will likely spook the trikes, know that these two were known to supplement their diet with meat. So the mere act of eating a dead Ceratosaurus foolish enough to attack the herd won't really spook any trikes. There is a problem. Like any hybrid, any advantage will bring in disadvantages. We just talked about how T-Rex makes up a considerable chunk of this animal's brain, and after becoming large enough and brain more developed, coexisting with what is instinctively a prey animal and a mortal enemy species in the wild will be increasingly difficult. With random bursts of aggressive behavior, the other trikes will begin to keep their distance and eventually begin to shun the Ultima away. Coincidentally, it is around this age where young Triceratops would take off on their own. And fortunately for the Empress, in progress, her modified accelerated growth rate granted her a corporal build large enough to fend off against a good majority of the animals in this island already. Feeding on vegetation and any corpses she runs into, it won't take long for Sorna to begin shaking from footfalls of rumbling earth. Ultima imperitrix, adult form, 20 feet tall in quadrupedal stance, 32 feet tall in facultative bipedal stance, length 60 feet, weight up to 18 tons. So, to talk about the part we've all been waiting for, let's discuss her weapons. The Ultima imperatrix, upon reaching her full size, is literally armed head to toe and back with weaponry. This animal, as discussed already, is composed of animals who can be put into groups depending on their fight methodology. Both the Triceratops and T-Rex were used to using both their brow horns or lacrimal bones for blunt impacts, and both with an outstanding bite. Both Borealopelta and Stegosaurus may have used their tails for offense. Not to mention Ingentia prima and Alamosaurus being sauropods who may have used their tails and even their front limbs for intraspecies combat. Using these creatures with similar attack methodologies will cause less confusion and lessen split instincts during combat, like in the case of the Ultimasaurus, where the genetic contributors fought very differently. Starting at the business end of the now Empress, the head and neck alone of the Ultima would likely weigh nearly 2.6 tons. Just getting bashed or headbutt by this cranium is like getting a Ford F-150 truck of the same weight thrown at you. The jaw strength of the Tyrannosaurus would be augmented and bolstered by the enlarged jaw muscle attachment by the Triceratops DNA. That's right, if you didn't know, Ceratopsians actually come packed with some really strong bite forces. The frills on Ceratopsians serve many different purposes, but one of the earliest was to allow the major jaw muscles, the adductor mandibulae externus, more room to attach higher up on the skull. These massive herbivores used these traits to pulverize anything they got between their jaws. Scaling up to the size of the Ultima, the Empress could jump down with over 63,310 newtons of force. Assuming the Ultima is biting down with the middle portion of its jaw where the T-Rex-like teeth are, this could create forces in excess of 20,050 psi. If you can believe it, this bite might even get worse. Because for those teeth to sink in, so does that beak. Ceratopsians were no strangers to leveraging their sharp beaks for combat. This special bone, known as a predentary, some of the hardest bone in its body and laminated with keratin, could take and deal a lot of force. Mounted on this skull, the beak wouldn't bite down as hard as you might think because it is pretty far away from the middle portion of the mouth where the hardest bite force would be. Despite this, we estimate that this beak could still produce 9,700 psi, carving these sharp edges of the beak deep into the tissue, like the most lethal shears ever seen in the animal kingdom. The Ultima comes packing a pair of prongs over 2 meters long, and putting all its force behind these sharp points is going to be lethal. A stationary lunge or fencing maneuver with these horns could potentially produce well over 20,401 newtons of force. In a perfect stab, this could land a blow of over 7,400 psi. It gets even worse if Ultima was managing to get some speed behind her. While she wouldn't be breaking any land speed records at only 9.5 miles per hour, being 18 tons turns her into a living freight train. Once up to full speed against a target too slow or incapacitated to get out of the way, her horns wind up striking with an imperial 29,000 psi. This wouldn't just punch a hole in something, but it would send shockwaves through the body that can rupture organs not even directly hit. Like getting shot with a sniper rifle, doesn't really matter where the bullet hits, just what's connected to it. This hybrid monstrosity is equipped with much more, so strap in because we're only just getting started. Going from the head to the arms, imperatrix being a quadruped only increases the amount of muscle mass on those forelimbs. Sporting a robust shoulder blade and the same dense musculature early sauropods have for both walking and fighting with their arms, each of the Ultima's forelimbs weigh over 3.5 tons. Factoring in a reasonable swing speed, and a smack from the Ultima would be like getting clobbered by the biggest bear in history times 20. Forces could range from 450 to as high as 867,000 newtons. This would be spread out across the impact site, comparable to a 50-mile-an-hour pickup truck crash. If this talon on the thumb, almost 4 feet long thanks to the Ingentia DNA, makes contact, those numbers and the rending injuries that followed could be catastrophically worse. Any unlucky victim that gets in range would be smacked, grabbed, shoved to the ground, gouged, and crushed. We'll continue down to the body of the Ultima. The armory itself on this animal is an asset all on its own. Ankylosaurus might be the most famous armored dinosaur, but its smaller relatives like Borealopelta put it to shame. Called a nodosaur, these were cousins of the Ankylosaurus that sported drastically thicker armor, upwards of 6 inches thick in this comparatively tiny dinosaur. Research by Michael Habib shows that nodosaur armor is layered multiple times over by sheets of keratin, bone, and underlying fibers woven under the skin. Together, this thick armor acts like hardened plates on top and Kevlar on the bottom. At Ultima size, the scaled-up version of this armor would mean that not even the mighty bite of a T-Rex would be capable of biting through, which could be up to 2 feet deep in some spots. Down in the underbelly, we have the armored titanosaur coming in, Alamosaurus. Underneath the hide on the flanks and belly are a fine mesh of smaller nodules of bone and dense fibers, acting like a layer of Kevlar and chainmail to protect the undercarriage. Between these and thick gastralia, effectively doubling the ribcage, the Empress is armored above and below. Lining the sides of the hybrid's armor are those formidable spikes, perfect for discouraging a flanking attacker or shoving into a foe when brawling. With some of the longest being over a meter long, these bladed spikes can potentially trap and scissor anything that gets caught between them when the spikes slide past each other. This is especially true on the tail, sporting a battery of spines that are much more effective at a larger size than other options like a tail club. The added height and longer tail thanks to the Alamosaurus additive means that this quasi-thagomizer has a reach of over 8 meters with spikes over 1.5 meters long. With it able to whip back and forth surprisingly fast, this makes approaching the hybrid from the flanks extremely risky. And we've already covered how bad of an idea it is to get in front of it anyways.
Milo's Rewards is here. Join for free today to unlock member perks from the palm of your hand. With every purchase, all members earn...
What would all this weaponry be used on? Much of Site B is not going to be happy about that answer, both carnivore and herbivore alike. There's a few reasons why we mentioned that this animal isn't really meant for living in the wild. Fueling a body like this needs a lot of food. Research on dinosaur metabolism, modern and extinct, will give us some insight as to how much the Empress needs to eat. For every kilogram of body mass, this hybrid would need to eat between 25 and 30 calories of food. And with a mass of over 18,000 kilos, that translates to somewhere between 450,000 and 576,000 calories of food daily. Recall that this animal is mostly herbivorous, with around 70% of its diet being greenery. Thankfully, Sorna has nothing but a bounty of food to offer, likely inhabited by native farmers and then later built upon by InGen. There are a lot of feral crops and high-calorie prehistoric plants all over the island. Breadfruit, a common staple across the Pacific, fueled Maori explorers for centuries before it spread across Latin America. Just one contains 2,200 easily digested calories. But the other 30% is bloody business. Surely you want to hear how Imperatrix acquires this portion of her diet. The Ultima imperatrix would be what is called a hyper-carnivore. These are predators that certainly eat their fill of bloody meals. A modern example that might be a good comparison is the iconic grizzly bear. With a combination of ambush tactics and sheer stubbornness, the Ultima could still hunt a large number of the big dinosaurs on the island, crunching slower-moving stegosaurus necks and skulls between its jaws, or crushing an ankylosaur with stomps and swipes would provide it a meal for days. Should the hybrid come up against another predator, a defensive swing of that tail might end up netting it another meal. Just like grizzlies, the hybrid might also leverage its huge size and imposing stature to intimidate other predators from their kills. This behavior, called kleptoparasitism, is very common amongst predators big and small. Just like grizzlies, a good chunk of the Ultima's meaty calories might come from bullying other carnivores off their kills. This no doubt will draw conflicts with the other two apex predators of the island. Any T-Rex she encounters might make a very fatal mistake of attacking what they might see as a rival predator, or possible prey if they key into the Triceratops' horns. If the buck and don't know better, they will avoid picking a fight, lest one of them gets widowed. This walking pile of aggro, however, the Spinosaurus, is not only an apex predator in his own right, but one that goes out of his way to kill other apex predators. Eric Kirby's observations and a rumored cut Sorna sequence from Camp Cretaceous makes it very clear that this is one dinosaur who goes looking for a fight. This is one fight where the Spino's typical key advantage, weight, is reversed. Ultima is too armored for the sailback's claws and teeth to do much damage. Even a late adolescent Ultima would be able to have a decent chance against an aggressive Spinosaurus. Given her weight and a heavily armored body would make it a risky move to get anywhere near an intelligent animal with many weapons at her disposal. Yeah, you can see why this might not end up too well for the Spino. If it shows the sense it did when confronted by fire or a triumphant T-Rex duo, it too will run after failing to kill the Ultima. This leaves the Imperatrix with a run of the island in places that suit her. And any predators who survive an encounter with her will soon learn to avoid and give up kills if the giant Gestalt monster arrives. The Ultima would be the apex predator and an apex scavenger. Staking out near popular game trails like the one we saw in the Lost World would make this even easier. And it is here she would also find a beast fit for the Empress. These same game trails and riverways are frequented by the island's Brachiosaurus and Mamenchisaurus herds. Upwards of 30 to 60 tons apiece. In real life, these were formidable animals. Their InGen counterparts, however, have let's say a less impressive track record against theropods. Ramming those huge horns into the flank of a big target, bursting vitals, and rupturing blood vessels with the shockwaves, this would be more than enough to make quick work of giants multiple times her size. Now, note that this animal wouldn't crash the entire ecosystem by recklessly killing, but it would be a dominant presence anywhere it went. This animal of sheer size, whose purpose is to be an entertainment combat animal, may have been able to settle into this ecosystem quite easily. Her reign, however, might find itself challenged in a scenario where another hybrid devastated Isla Nublar. Another hybrid who, by accident or searching for new domains, arrived on the shores of Site B.